So we are Words After Dark. We're a creators coalition of 3 authors. I am Ace Slayton. I'm a fantasy writer.
I am Alexa Windsor. I am a horror and mystery writer.
I'm Mouse, and I also write mostly fantasy mixed in with other stuff.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Is this on?
No. I could just yell.
There we go.
Oh, okay. I'm Mouse. We've had to do that. So yeah, we're here to talk to you guys about like how to make characters, and then like once you have the basics of how to make characters, like what to do with them afterwards.
So basic disclaimers. We kind of like to run these as a discussion type panel. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hands, and we'll take some questions as we go.
Secondary disclaimer, we will give you lots of suggestions about how to do stuff, but by no means is this an exhaustive list. If you already have a method that works for you, then that's fantastic. Maybe you'll get something extra. But like just because we suggest to do something doesn't make it law.
Yes, there's plenty of ways to go about doing things.
What works for one may not necessarily work for all.
So,
You need a roll?
we'll get rolling. So we're going to start off by talking about what the process of creating characters.
Yes. There we go.
And this process is generally very different for everybody. Some people get inspired by media, music, video, other writing.
Video games. Sometimes it's seeing a character and being like, oh, I want to write something like that. That inspires me. And one that I find is I will find a character in media and be like, wow, they did that really badly. So now I want to write that. But inspiration can come from anywhere.
I have been inspired by pictures that I see, either fan art or just like original art, even murals. Or I've seen movies and go, wow, I don't understand why they had that character do that thing. Why don't I make a character for myself and have them do the thing I wanted that character to do? Because characters never do what I want.
Another way you can go about it is if you're somebody who already has a lot of characters, a good thing can be to look at what you have, look at what you don't have, and maybe explore some of those possibilities.
Most writers will generally start out with a type. They generally create like a certain subset of characters. And after a while you want to try something new and challenge yourself. So it's always good to look at what kind of characters do I usually write and what can I write to contrast that. And also, sometimes when you're making a project, whether it's writing a book or doing a role play, you need a character. So sometimes the need presents itself to you before the inspiration does, and you have to sit down and be like, okay, what kind of space does this person need to fill?
These two are really good at thinking up characters on the fly. They'll know the need that they have, and they'll be able to think of one immediately to fill it. I am a lot slower in my character creation process. Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. So what I'll find is that characters emerge rather than me being able to sit down and think through the process. Where I'll be going throughout my day, I'll be letting a character idea simmer, and then they'll slowly come together. So there's really no pressure in, you thinking that you have to be able to sit down and come up with one off the fly.
Yeah, a lot of the time, so I write like a lot of like power or ability based like fantasy. So a lot of the times I'll take a power that I don't have.
You'll look at something and be like, oh, that's a really neat concept. How can I apply that concept to a person?
Yes.
A lot of things that I do in order to give myself inspiration or ideas, especially if I'm trying to develop a character, is that I will actually try to fill out a character sheet for them. And you can think of this as the D&D character sheets, but also online there are templates where you can fill out their name, you can fill out their eye color, you can fill out their favorite foods, things that you may not generally come into play during your story, but it's just kind of good for you to know and kind of get a feel for that character and to help them become a little more fleshed out, like a person in your head.
At the same time, I don't think you should only focus on those things or the physical traits, because those aren't going to be the things that show up in your work.
Things like character sheets are great references. They ask you questions that you can focus on specifically, rather than being like, oh, I need to make a person, where do I start? They give you kind of a shopping list, but you can't really be beholden to them because they really only give surface information. So if you're ever stuck, they're a good place to start, but you're gonna have to do the rest of the legwork yourself.
Or if you need to keep track of things.
Especially if you're writing a series.
I have a situation with one of my books where I had a character that I was writing for several years, and I sat down to write the novel, and I was like, I don't remember what kind of eye color I gave this guy. I had to go through and dig through years old notes to try and find it. So sometimes it's nice to have them organized.
Another thing that's kind of interesting to think about is coming up with zodiacs for your characters. You can either do it where you pick out their birthday and, you know, kind of see what characteristics might come as a result of what zodiacs they have, or they have kind of reverse tests where you can think of your character, what they might do in a certain situation and what they're like. You can plug it into a personality test and it will generate a zodiac based on the information that you fed it. And that's kind of good to get an idea of certain character traits that you may not have thought of before, and it kind of gives you an idea of how you can maybe flesh out their dynamics.
It's definitely not something I would do for every single character, because you're going to get more canned character types, but it can be good if you're struggling, or if you need a starting place.
Yeah, they can give you good jumping off points. Any online survey, online test that you do for your personality for fun, you can run your characters through, just to see if you can come up with something interesting to take away from it.
So one thing I should go over while we're talking about defining our characters is, I don't think it's generally a good idea to get too into the weeds with defining everything about your character before you write them. The reason for this is, at least in my experience, I've found that when you make a character and you have enough to where you're going to go and write them, a lot of the times they'll turn out a little differently than you originally thought they were going to. And that's normal. That's there's no way you're going to sit down and be able to know exactly how they're going to act when you're creating them. And if you leave yourself some space and don't define everything beforehand, then it gives you a little more wiggle room to allow for that kind of growth, and that's how you get more nuanced characters.
Characters have the fascinating tendency to write themselves as you're going through the story, and sometimes they can surprise you.
Yep.
So your goal is to get to the point where your character is consistent enough that you can allow them to do that, because that way the growth is more organic, it's more interesting generally. So you want to write them, find excuses to write them in short stories, in one-shots, stick them in fanfic, who cares, write them in RPs, because not only are all those good practice for you as a writer, but they're good excuses to see your character interacting with other situations and people. And all that will help you figure out how distinct they are and what kind of things you can expect from them when you write your own work.
Also, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, stick hands in, it's fine. I'll take it.
One exercise that I like doing if I ever get kind of stuck with characterization, or kind of like stuck thinking of a plot, is I have a character describe each of the other characters through their own words. Basically do an exercise as to what they think of everyone else who's around them.
That's actually handy in more than one way, because not only does it give you more information on the character that you're writing, or whose perspective you're writing from, but it can give you the demeanors of your other characters and how they come off to other people. So actually, I did not know that you did that.
I did it for Raven Design.
Oh, yeah. Also, we kind of skipped over this point, so I'm going to go back. Things like your physical description of your character, a lot of that isn't necessarily super integral to their demeanor and how they act, but you can find ways to tie their description to who they are. Like what kind of job do they have? Where do they live? All that kind of stuff will define what kind of clothes they wear. Their personality will define like the kind of style that they like to have. Are they a person who likes loud colors? Are they a person who is mostly black?
You talked about not getting into the weeds, talking about all the details of the characters. How much backstory is too much backstory? Because I find that I end up
When it's
writing...
ruining your life.
Knowing a character's full backstory is going to be good for you to know. You don't necessarily have to put it all in the work.
My point was more before you start writing them too, because a lot of the times you do write them and they turn out a little differently. If you flesh out their entire backstory and then you write them, you've kind of boxed yourself in to where now they have to go with whatever your backstory is, even if we've had a lot of like RPs happen where something awesome, some awesome character development will happen that we hadn't planned for. But if you
didn't make it into the books, probably.
Yeah. But if you like do all of that before you actually start writing them, then you kind of lose some of that freedom. So it's really up to you. Some people prefer way more structured, I guess, character.
Bear in mind that when it makes it onto the page, anything can be changed in editing.
It's very subjective. You want enough to give your character a sense of consistency, and you don't want to have enough that you have no flexibility. Where that line is really depends on how much you want to have. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong if you actually are the kind of person who wants to detail down every single thing. If that makes you feel more comfortable writing the character, do it. But it's just that that's not always the case. So yeah, you will figure it out, I guess, is the really unsatisfying answer. Go ahead.
I was told never make a side character more interesting than your main character. Like with that, like how much detail should you be able to put into someone without them being more interesting?
That is terrible advice, first of all.
Yeah, that's dumb.
The truth of the matter is your main character is going to take more time to create just because more of them is going to be shown in the book. But a book is just a story about people.
If your side character is that interesting, give them a spin-off project. It's fine. Will people judge you? Does it matter?
If your side character turns out to be more fleshed out or more interesting, consider making them the main character.
Yeah, maybe they are the main character. There really is no rule saying that your side character can't be interesting. Actually, this is an anime convention, so you all might be familiar with this. If you watch a show and you decide you hate the main character, and you only end up watching it because the side cast is so much more entertaining. That's what happens. So that is a thing that happens. It's a good thing to try and avoid when you're sitting down and like putting a work together. But when you're just playing with ideas, who cares?
I would say actually a genre that intentionally invokes that would be your typical harem anime actually.
Oh yeah, because your main character has to be a stand-in for the viewer.
Yeah, so they're like there's some kind of boring milquetoast, who cares about them, but then there's like, then fate decrees that this character is orbited by characters
much more
who are
interesting people.
who are hopefully more interesting and not cookie cutter stereotypes, which they often are, but still.
That's a case where it works for the genre.
In the sense of world building with characters, when do you know when you have enough characters for a particular setting? Like because a character is just the individual in the setting, the people around them make up the place just as much as
you probably will not know if you have enough cast until you sit down to write the thing.
Outlines will also help that because you'll be able to see how many characters and when your characters are popping up.
But sometimes you just sit down to write something and you go, oh no, I need someone to do this. I need this person to say this thing to move the plot forward, and you're like, oh great, I wrote myself in a corner. It happens, throw someone else in there. But getting organized decreases the chance of that happening.
A lot of that is by feel too, because Like, I know this book I had a side character, a fairly important side character, that started out as just a name that was going to be referenced once, and
She runs half the book.
she's in a lot of the book, so a lot of that is when you're writing it, you'll get a feel for that. Also, beta readers can help with that. If you give it to a beta reader and they say, hey, this world feels kind of empty, then that's a sign that you might need more people.
We had a question, the purple hair.
Yeah. So what would you recommend if someone has trouble with, say, when they write the character out, sometimes putting in their own mannerisms instead of putting in what they think the character would actually do?
Okay, the main character of this book is basically me, but with a few background alterations.
It explains why I like him so much.
It's okay to like have a lot of your mannerisms manifest in a character, because ultimately you're going to be writing what you know, and a little piece of you is going to wind up in the work anyway.
It depends what you're going for too. Like, if there are times when you're going to want a main character that isn't anything like you, and in those cases, it's really a matter of developing the character.
Practice.
Yes, to the point where you can write them, and they are their own. I always say you shouldn't be writing the character; they should be writing themselves. And it's really just a lot of practice and like keeping yourself separate from that.
I was gonna say, like, Alexa totally has a point. That's, you're always gonna end up with like remnants of yourself in whatever you write. It's like nearly impossible to scrub out, even if you try. But the more you focus on what makes the character different from yourself, the more chances you'll have to embrace those traits and practice writing the character.
Going back to writing yourself in a corner, I had that experience once, and when I couldn't figure out what to do, I wrote up a short story to clear my head, and wound up making that as putting that in as a chapter. But I had to do heavy editing because it actually violated a whole lot of the rules set beforehand in the actual story.
Organization.
But also, I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a good solution. It's a 1,000%
Books
good solution.
and stories are flexible things, and I think a lot of people don't look at them that way. But you can change them. If you don't like something, you can change the way it's going. Also, I know we'll touch on canons a little later, but I find that
Canon is not law.
it's really good to, especially if you have a character that you just came up with and you're not comfortable writing them in maybe what their book is going to be. It can be good to write things that you know are non-canon. Write them going to the grocery store. Write them having a conflict with someone.
Write them with characters they haven't appeared with yet. How would they interact with those characters?
That's also why RP, or co-writing, is such a great tool in learning how to write your characters, because it's like book light. You don't have to worry about all the details.
Co-writing is also great because you can't slack off because you know someone's waiting for your reply. So if you're a person who likes to procrastinate, it won't work. We have more hands.
Let's start with white shirt up here.
Hi, I'm sorry, this is more of a general question, but what are your guys' best resources for trying to find like co-writers and beta readers and stuff like that when you don't have anybody that can help you with your process?
Our Discord channel.
Yeah, so we have a great little community that we've fostered over the past like year and a half on our Discord server. That's all authors and creative people in general. Other than that, Facebook groups.
It can be hard because I don't know if you're in the same boat that a lot of people are, where you grow up and these people are everywhere, and then all the forums and all the places that you grew up with no longer exist, so you can't find them anymore. They just all moved to Discord. It's true, we're all there. Come find us.
You mentioned a character in development and allowing room for characters to change over the course of the story. Do you have any tips for writing a convincing change, or like having a character change in a way that is not jarring but still surprises?
I'm gonna take this. You want to make sure that you build yourself a good support system. My best example for this is I have the main, I think Action Path's up here. The main character in Action Path, her name's Anna, she's a bitch. She's not. She's kind of humorless and she's very strict. And the whole book is kind of about her coming to be a more reasonable human being without losing the parts of her that make her what she is. She's a knight, and she's very good at her job, and she's very committed to it. So how do I make her more human without sacrificing her commitment to her work? First of all, you want to make it a reasonable change. People aren't usually going to do 180s, and if they do, it's going to be very uncomfortable. And they're going to have a lot of learning.
And if they do a 180, it's going to be something huge that causes that.
So you want to make sure the growth is in sustainable steps. You want your reader to be able to follow along. Oh, this is an example of that kind of growth. This is like her first time that she did this. Well, what prompted her to do that?
Everybody has motivations. What would motivate the character to?
So motivating her to be less of a pain in the ass. I gave her another character to encourage that kind of behavior. So she was like, oh, well, he's not mean, so I can't really be mean to him because then everyone's going to look at me like I'm a jerk. So it helped her take those small steps because it's going to be a gradual development. Build yourself a good skeleton. Give yourself like marks that you want to hit in their development and how you want to get there. And that'll help it come off as more paced and more normal, I think, rather than having it happen suddenly.
Also, negative character development is still character development.
You have a whole book about that.
Yeah, so I won't spoil it, but the villain in this book, you basically get to see how they kind of unravel. They start off the book as a fairly normal person, and over the course of the book, they unravel into this kind of self-serving villain. And that is also character development, even though they're turning into a worse person than they were.
Sliding down all the way to the other end of the scale of morality still counts. That's still change.
We had way in the back. I thought we had a question way in the back.
Sometimes the character of the villain are kind of ironically misunderstood. Sometimes their backstory is like real dark in a combat way. And it's kind of like we read many like Marvel comics about they just want to be recognized, they can be useful team players, not leaders. This kind of makes sense for a character.
So what's the question?
They can be misunderstood, right?
Pardon?
Some characters of the villain, there can be a backstory, same time there can be a misunderstood character.
Asking if they could be misunderstood.
A character, regardless of whether or not they're a villain, can be misunderstood for the motives. You can write a hero who's doing heroic things for all the wrong reasons, just as you can have a villain doing wrong things for the wrong reasons. Because if a hero is doing it for the glory, does that make them more of a good person or more of a bad person? If they're doing it by taking out other heroes so they get the spotlight, does that make them more of a good person or more of a bad person?
A villain can be trying to do good things and then wind up, like when people perceive them, they think, wow, this is a terrible thing you've done. But they were trying to do what was good in their head. That's an interesting character trait. And that can also be developed.
So pretty much is kind of like you watch like a movie or episode of the X-Men. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. Oh, I think he was more commenting than getting the question.
Yes, but you have another one.
Yes. I find my stories, once I hit the end of the usefulness of a character, turning into a George R.R. Martin bloodbath. How do you exit characters without their death?
One of the ways you can cut down on your massacring is by seeing if you can make the characters you have more multi-purpose. Can they fulfill more roles and do more things, maybe involving character development to fill those roles, so that way they remain useful for your story.
And sometimes they can maybe just get in a car and drive away.
Yeah, you can put them on,
without-
put them on a bus.
Also, outlines will help you with that.
Yeah, again, getting organized ahead of time will help you cut down on the amount of like extra people you have laying around, which will give you less people to fill up.
We all hate outlines, but they're great.
Oh yeah, no, like we will tell you to write them, but like when we have to sit down and write them, we still hate them.
Okay, well, just in like terms of like, you know, the extra character bloodbath thing, one thing I try to avoid in my writing is unnecessary killing. And not because I'm squeamish, oh no. But because once you kill off a character, any narrative potential that character may be able to provide is gone.
Yeah, it's a waste.
So it's like, now very definitely, if the best way to enhance the narrative or a character, you know, motivation is to kill somebody, then go for it. Within the context of fiction, I'm not telling you to go out and kill someone on the street. But I would much rather put that character on ice in some way. And that can be as little as just shifting the narrative spotlight away from them. Just because if the audience is not seeing what's going on with that character, often as not, they will assume that it's because nothing interesting is going on at the time.
You know, one thing I've noticed is that with series that have a lot of character deaths, people will find themselves trying not to get attached to characters because they know that there's a good chance that character is going to die down the line.
That's the Sword Art Online problem.
So you want a balance of people dying, oh wow, that's a huge tragedy, but you know, it's good for their character arc, you know, that was, their usefulness is in the death for you as a writer, but at the same time you don't want every character dying, because then no one's going to want to get attached.
That was actually exactly what happened with me in Sword Art Online. Is I started watching it, and then they kept killing off characters, and they bring in a new person, and I couldn't get attached to them because I didn't know if they were going to survive the episode. So
Spotlight shifting is not a bad idea. The downside is that if you, like any solution, if you use it too many times, people are just going to be like, are people just disappearing? Where did your cast go? So it is totally an option, especially if you have like a rotating cast. Both Melancholy books have very big casts, and we actually use that a lot because they're not all doing something interesting all the time. But you either want to make sure that you eventually tie that up, or give some kind of offhand reference to give your reader closure, because otherwise that character is gone.
I'm curious, how do you dole out information about a character, like, without it sounding like this, like he or she looked like this, and this? Like, how do you do that in an interesting way?
I will do it, like, if it's a new character being introduced, think about the character who's meeting them. What are they going to notice first?
That's a really good way to give you two types of characterization simultaneously. The character whose perspective you're writing from, what are they going to notice? What are the things that they prioritize when they meet someone? And also that tells you what stands out about your other character. And some things you can look for ways to demonstrate. Things like physical description, you'll have lots of chances that come up because people are looking at this person with their eyeballs usually. So it's really easy to make an offhand comment about something they're wearing or their hair color. And their demeanor and things like that. That will come up in the way you write them. So a lot of times those like page-long descriptions just aren't necessary to get the point across.
Show, don't tell.
You don't necessarily have to like list a person's entire physical description all in one paragraph right when you meet them.
And even if you did, your reader's not going to see them the way you see them. It's not going to help.
We have a couple.
Yeah, go ahead, Budget. Let's do black shirt, then white shirt.
Okay, oh, I didn't see
And
that.
then
Sorry.
flower crown.
I'm hiding, sorry. I have my glasses on.
I had a friend who was writing a story, and he found that he was killing off all his characters too quickly, and since it was a mythological story, he decided to take on pull it into a Valkyrie style arc. A lot of the characters were introduced more by reputation than actual physical introduction long before they appear.
In some settings, that will work just fine, especially if you're writing a character who has a kind of reputation you can leverage like that. So yeah, that's a valid tactic.
We have one here. What kind of advice do you guys have for trying to write a villain who you don't want to know he's the villain, which is so cliched, and it feels like it's
No, it's my
impossible to do
favorite.
without
No.
everybody's like he's the bad guy, that's the bad guy.
You could always kind of write yourself a side story about what that villain is perceiving throughout your main story. Because they're gonna be behaving in ways that you don't want your reader to know like they're the villain. But there are very small hints that, will probably show itself through the main story.
Villains generally take more work because you usually have to give them more motivation because people usually aren't motivated to be jerks. For a villain like that, specifically someone who lays low for like 95% of your book, you're actually making two different characters. You're making your villain as the person running around doing villain things, and you're also crafting their persona, who they are presenting to the rest of the world. So you can very deliberately make these two things concurrently. You can be like, okay, this is the reason why they're doing this villainy, this is what this means, this is what their plan is, and then you can go, okay, in order to get that done, what kind of mannerisms do they adopt? Why do they make those mannerisms work?
What kind of their own mannerisms are going to...
Yeah, what bleeds through.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, you're making two people, and thinking about it that way might help you set it up in a way that makes their persona sufficiently distanced from whatever nonsense they're up to.
We have one question.
Yeah, so I am writing a fanfic that I started way back in high school years ago. And I was starting to follow the game that was based on. I was starting to do it like word by word, basically, scene by scene. Now that I'm older and I want to kind of veer away from that, how could I make it still be kind of on the game that I'm basing it, but make it my own?
You're early. You're here for tomorrow's panel.
Oh.
Tomorrow we have plot and world building.
Oh.
But it is a good question. Do we want to try and cover that, or do you want to come and talk to us afterwards, and we'll get into that? 'Cause it's a little bit off topic.
Sure.
Okay.
We're gonna
get through the rest of our notes quick, and then we'll take more questions.
Yeah.
Because the questions are very good. We're gonna jump into like common writing hang-ups, which might help answer some of your questions.
Writing people who aren't...
Oh yeah, I'm gonna start. When you're writing a character, a lot of times people are afraid to write people whose experiences significantly differ from their own. A lot of times that's writing someone of a different gender or a different orientation, maybe writing someone of a different race. All of those things are perfectly good things to do when you're a writer. You want to have a diverse and interesting cast, and the world is diverse and interesting, so why would you not? But it's very easy to do badly, and it's easy to do badly if you're lazy. You want to take those characters and you want to develop them with as much empathy as you would anyone else. Actually, I'm going to specifically talk about writing characters of another gender. People tend to get really hung up over this, and I'm not gonna name any names, but if you go on Twitter, you can find examples of male authors who can't write female characters. I'm sure some of you see them. So actually, we have a male author who's really good at writing female characters. How do you do it?
You don't treat them any differently than you would treat a male character.
Oh my God, are you telling me women are people?
Yes. I've had people tell me not to write women before. I've had people ask me how you do it. You do it as well as you write a guy or any other orientation. The real difference is societal context. That's going to give you the differences in a lady versus a dude. Some societies, it doesn't matter.
A lot of we're trying to come up with a bad example, we realize that all the books that we write generally occur in societies where it's irrelevant.
So both of the Melancholia books are written in this kind of dark world where there's much larger problems to worry about than whether two girls are sleeping together or that kind of thing. So whether you're a guy or a girl, it doesn't matter.
It's completely irrelevant in that context.
The main character of the first book is a girl who goes.
Actually, the main character of both books is two
Oh
different
yeah,
ladies.
two different ladies who go and fight monsters,
Woohoo.
and they're not treated any differently than the guys who go and fight monsters. A counterexample to that is Anna's not exactly a great example, but
a different medieval style
think
fantasy
of
book.
your medieval style fantasy, and think of a lady who wants to be a knight as opposed to a guy who wants to be a knight.
I'm sure you can come up with 100 examples.
She's gonna have a much harder time being a knight than a guy is, and that's just the kind of stuff that you have to worry about when you're writing.
Tomorrow's pet.
Yeah.
Plot and world building.
In my books, it takes place in modern day Chicago. Chicago is a very diverse place. So my characters will meet people of different orientations, different, races, different skin colors. So I remind myself each character should be a person in my mind. And I will have people from, of that skin color, make sure that I'm not falling into stereotypical.
If you're worried, get someone to check your work. That's not illegal and it's not bad. Hand it to a beta reader and go, does this make me a freaking asshole? What else on there? Oh, I'm gonna switch these last two into one point. People like to talk about writing balanced characters. They tell you to stay away from writing Mary Sue's, and both of those are terrible advice. The thing is that not all characters are balanced. Every person that you meet has flaws, but the fact is that not every character's flaws are going to be important. And when you're looking at like a list of character traits, some flaws don't stay flaws, and some things that should be bonuses then become them. If a character is stubborn, that's not a bad thing. Like, they're not afraid to do the things they have to do. You'll find a lot of heroes who are stubborn. But I mean, you'll find villains who are just the same because it borders on obsession at that point. They're both stubborn, so that trait itself does not make them balanced or unbalanced.
And we're not clearing all Mary Sue's. We're just saying.
Mary Sue is usually a problem with the characters around them and the character themselves. You can write a character who has like wild, crazy, obnoxious powers. Sure, you can write a character who's sheer wish fulfillment. But the scenarios that you put them in should still be fairly suitable and fairly reasonable for what that character is doing. If a character has those kind of skills, the problems that they face will still be challenges for those skills.
Did you know that Batman is practically a power trip Gary Stu?
Batman's like the biggest version. So is Iron Man. For sure.
He's a really fun character to explore for a lot of different reasons, but he's totally a power trip.
That doesn't make them bad.
On the other end of the spectrum, Superman is often called out for being a Mary Sue, but if people actually read the stories, they'll find that his situations are actually pretty challenging for what he's there for and what he does.
Thank you.
You kids fill in a lot of people complaining about comics with, well, if you actually read comics.
Not just actually read comics, just any other media he's been in.
I have strong feelings about Superman.
I think that's mostly it for our list, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we can do questions.
Like 5 minutes of questions.
Yeah. This way, that way? Yeah.
What are some good ways to display a villain's like overarching power to show that they are strong, a lot stronger than the hero, without basically being like, hey, you know that mentor you've been training with? I'm gonna kill him.
You're going to want to give your villain successes. Depending on how you set up your hero, killing that mentor might not be even on the villain's to-do list. Figure out what your villain's plan is, and give them those successes that make them a measurable threat.
What is your villain doing when he's not going after the main character? Surely something had to have happened on his rise to power if he was destroying cities have someone see how he destroyed a city.
We go ahead and call
How do you start an outline?
You can either do it chronologically, where you start from beginning to end. I personally like a style of outlining where I take whatever ideas I have, I put them on a page, I try to connect the dots, and then I slowly make that more detailed.
It's really what is going to serve you the best. I think both me and Mouse we do a grid of boxes for chapters, and then we have just like a sentence or two of what happens in a chapter, but it's whatever you need in an outline.
So
really.
do you outline the whole entire story, and then you go back and then you connect everything?
There's also a good thing called the Snowflake Method that kind of gives you that sort of flexibility, where you put it all down, but you might not be sure where your background will fit into everything. So you'll have the main story, but the Snowflake Method will allow you to have a branch where you can put in your background so that you can kind of pull from that and put it into your main outline.
But to answer your question, yes, you, at least I outline the whole story. And that gives you a good picture of especially in this book, since this book had so many people, it let me go back and look and see, oh, this person showed up in chapter 3 and in chapter 8, but then they're not seen again until chapter 20. Maybe I should stick them in somewhere, like have a scene with them somewhere.
There's a bunch of different kinds of outlines. There's tons. Depending on what you need, you can find one that will suit your purpose. And also depending on what kind of writer you are. Some people like really detailed outlines. Like I said, our outlines normally do cover the whole plot, but they're very bare bones, and we fill them in as we go. But there's lots of different styles. You can find one that will fit whatever it is that you're working on.
If you want, I have a master list that I found somewhere of kind of suggested outlines. So if you come and grab me after the panel, I can kind of find the link. So.
Thank you.
No question? Where are we going? This person sat their hand up the whole time. Yell!
Is it possible to write a villain that doesn't necessarily have like an understood background or
I mean, the Joker exists.
like a yeah, but like justifications for their evil, like a character that's just evil because they just want to.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I mean, the Joker exists.
I mean, the Joker exists. I actually, one of my favorite villains that I play with personally, is someone who does it because they think it's fun. It's their hobby. I mean, they have a day job and everything, but being a villain is like actually their hobby.
And can I also throw out Aku from Samurai Jack?
Oh, yeah.
You know, Aku means evil.
So, your villain's backstory doesn't have to be the focus. It does not even necessarily have to exist if you can write them consistently without it. You do you, basically. We haven't heard from you yet.
How do you make
Anti-hero. You make a hero, but you make him grumpy. No, it really is somebody who usually intends to do something good, who just isn't really super hung up on the morals it takes to get there. So give them a motivation, give them something that they want to achieve, and figure out what kind of lengths they would go to get there, and what differentiates them from like a more traditional hero.
Adversely, they just kind of got flung into the saving the world business, and they're just like, okay, fine, I guess no one else is gonna do it, I may as well.
Are we gonna have to wrap? Okay, they're gonna kick us out in just a couple minutes, so we're gonna call it here. If you guys have questions, you guys can come up and ask. We have cards up here.
Books.
We have books, if you want books, we have boojigas, we have buttons that are free, cards if you want to try and find us and ask a question. Yeah.